we'll be getting started with the webinar in just about 1 minute. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Let's get started with this. Thanks for coming tonight to the Find Your Fit, Understanding What College Costs and How to Pay Less webinar. I'm Mary Pat O'Neill, and I'm an independent college counselor in Redmond. And back in 2016, I started volunteering my services with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, and we created the Find Your Fit program, which has, I think, helped a lot of families throughout the district and beyond since we've done this. While I am an independent college counselor, the thing I always tell families is that I am not a financial planning college counselor. Obviously, I know more than the average bear, I always say, but the cost of college is such an important piece of the puzzle. And it's one that, working with my private clients, I notice a lot of families don't pay as much attention to it until maybe very, very late in the process. And so I am very happy to have Peg Keogh here with me. She's with College Aid Pro, and she is an expert in this field. I'm going to let Peg introduce herself, but so we're gonna do what we call a conversation tonight. We're going to be sharing the screen and sharing our knowledge about things. Peg, you want to say a few words before we start this program?
Sure. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, just a little intro on me, kind of where I came from and why I do what I do. I have twins that finished college a few years ago. So I know where you're at from a mom standpoint. I've been through this. And when my kids hit high school, my husband and I, started doing all this college thinking because they're in high school. And I realized that the landscape was just much more complex and confusing than it was when I was a kid. And I kind of had this aha moment that I could combine my decade of experience in financial planning at the time with this new expertise in college financial planning. And so that's what I did. I figured I could impact families even more. And so I started my business called Way to the Quad, which I started in 2014. And just recently, like last month, my business was acquired by College Aid Pro. And I know the guys at College Aid Pro because I use their software. It's integral to my practice. So it was just a great fit to kind of jump in with them and get rid of some of the stuff that was on my back to handle so I could do more stuff like this with families. So that's really how I came to this place. So I've got the expertise, but I'm also a parent that's gone through it. So I know where you are.
Yes, and I'm a parent too. Again, my kids are grown, although mine like graduate school for some reason. So it just seems like it never ends. But yeah, so Peg and I have both been there from all steps of this process. So, all right. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so we are going to be focusing mostly on the cost of college tonight. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the 3 different types of colleges, but this is a very conversational, kind of a relaxed presentation tonight. It is being recorded, and the Lake Washington Schools Foundation will be sending it out to everybody who signed up. There are handouts for them tonight, and then at the end we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So that's how it'll work. Okay, so I'm just going to start by kind of giving a little brief overview of the 3 different types of colleges that there are in the United States, because the type of college really has a big impact when it comes to admissibility, which I'll talk a little bit about, but more importantly for tonight, the cost of college. And it really does make a big impact. So the first category of colleges is the in-state public. And we're in Washington State, so we have 6. And it's the University of Washington, Washington State, Western Washington, Eastern Washington, Central Washington, and Evergreen State College. Because we're residents in Washington State, students who are applying, they get priority admission. So just using UW as an example, in fall 2020, 81% of students admitted to the University of Washington, the Seattle campus, were Washington State residents. But what applies to tonight is, because of all the property taxes that are paid, and property taxes fund higher or all education, the residents are given a big discount because of all the property taxes that they've paid. So they dramatically discount the cost of college. And when you hear the numbers with the other two categories, you're going to understand what I mean. But just to give you an example, UW and Washington State, they're roughly about $12,000 a year right now for in-state tuition. Again, that's not room and board, just tuition. The other schools tend to be a little bit less expensive, maybe $8,000 a year for tuition. So that's why so many families love in-state tuition from a budget standpoint, because it's almost always going to be the least expensive option for a family. The second category of schools is the trickiest one because it's the out-of-state public. So first of all, I'm talking about 49 other states. So I have to be kind of broad here. And as with all things college, it's going to depend on the college. But generally, so keep in mind, first of all, you're not a resident, so you don't get priority admission. But again, that's not the point of tonight. You're not a resident, so you haven't paid property taxes, so you don't get the discount that is offered for residents. And again, broadly speaking, it can be anywhere from $20,000 on the low end, and I've seen it as high as $45,000 a year. Again, that is just for tuition. So so you got to pay attention to that. And then the final category of schools is the private schools. And sometimes I have families say to me, well, those are too expensive. And obviously, because they're private schools, they're not funded through property tax, and in-state, out-of-state doesn't really impact that. From a cost standpoint, they tend to be on par with an out-of-state public school, again, depending on the school. But sometimes there can be more scholarship money available through a private school. Out-of-state publics, there are some that are generous with scholarship money. And then there's others that they save all of their scholarship money typically for residents. California is like that. Texas is like that. Georgia is like that. The University of Michigan is like that. So they're just things to take into account when you're looking and creating a college list. There is a category of schools called Wui Schools. It stands for the Western Undergraduate Exchange. There's 14 states who participate in Wui, and Washington is one of them. And what they do is, the public schools that participate in Wui, instead of paying roughly what would be about 3 times in-state tuition as an out-of-state resident, you only pay about 1.5 times, which is obviously a huge cost savings. Wui is not available at all the public schools. Like, you'd never see University of Oregon or Boulder or UCLA offering Wui. Wui has become, again, depending on the school, it's become pretty competitive. I was telling Peg earlier today that Boise State came out and said, in order to qualify for Wui, a student needs a 3.9 GPA, which shocked me. There are Oregon State's a Wui school, but they won't say what grades or anything a student needs. They say it's highly competitive. So then there's other schools where it might be a 3.0 or a 3.5 qualifies a student for Wui, but the website is just Wui, W-U-E I think it's ORG. And there's a list of all the schools and the majors and the qualifiers and all that. So, and then just my last slide before we get into our conversation is, I just like to show this, the annual examples of annual costs of college, because college is expensive, and, hopefully you get out in 4 years or less, but here's a horrible statistic in the United States, but something like 56% of freshmen graduate within 6 years. So I always told my kids, you got to do whatever you can to get out in 4 years or less, because college is really expensive. When you look at this chart, just a couple of things, you'll see some asterisks next to some of the names. It's like Western Washington. They're a school that will give merit aid to students, I've seen, for strong students. Gonzaga University, if a student is strong, good grades and things like that, most students, I would say $20,000-$25,000 a year. So you can take that off the total price. Colorado State, I'm showing as a Wui school, so you can see the big difference what Wui pricing can do compared to non-Wui. Anyways, and then there's great community and technical colleges that are a lot less, and sometimes for a lot of students that could be a great way to get started and then transfer out to a four-year school after they complete a two-year degree. So so do we get started on the questions now, Peg? And I should stop sharing?
That's great. That's
Okay.
great.
Okay, I'll stop sharing just in case you want to start sharing. Okay, so, all right. So Peg, what can you tell parents is ahead of them as a process when looking at financial fit? Because that's what today is all about, is more the
Yeah,
financial.
so let me, for that one, I'm gonna share my screen and just show you a graphic, because that helps kind of tee this up nicely. So basically, and I created this as I was going through this with my kids and then started using it in my business, but this is the process that all parents go through. And I've obviously made up my own names, right? But the pay less for college stage is really the planning part, understanding financial aid, and then understanding where you fit. And so that's going to make a lot more sense at the end of this presentation, because I'm going to show you some of these planning opportunities and how things can be different from school to school. So that's like kind of doing your homework, your due diligence, because colleges, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but they're all on sale. And you want to buy it on sale, right? The next step, so if I have any senior parents on here, that's forms and figures. That's the financial aid forms. They're both live now. We're going to talk about them in a minute, but they're both live, and it's getting those completed. And then the third step, which I think is the most fun part of this process, that's when your child's getting in, right? You're getting these acceptance letters from admissions, and then you're going to get what's called a financial aid award letter. And that's going to have, if you get any money from Office of Admissions in the form of merit, or if you get any need-based aid, kind of brings it all together as to what you're going to be expected to pay. And then that's also the stage where you can think about appealing, right? If that seems like that makes sense. And then the fourth step is really, you've got your short list and you're kind of really deciding on a 4-year view. I'm going to show you that in a little bit, because it's a 4-year expense. As Mary Pat said, I told my kids, I'm in this for 4 years. You got to make sure you finish this in 4 years, but 4 years is still a lot more than one, right? A lot of people focus on year one because that's what the colleges kind of present to you, but really bringing it together in a 4-year and comparing like the top 2 or 3 schools so that you can make your decision and know it's affordable. So that's really what's coming, down the pike, basically. That's the process that everybody is going through, basically.
Okay, so Peg, one of the questions, I kind of alluded to this when I was talking about the 3 types of colleges, is that oftentimes students will say, oh, I'm not even going to look at private schools because they're too expensive. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. Well, and you alluded to this a little bit, and it's common, but as I said, colleges are on sale, right? They're all discounting. It's just a matter of how they discount. And that's the key information as a family that you need to understand, because the most expensive schools now are, pushing $85,000, right? And there's not many people that can really stomach that and write what I say, be full pay or write a full check, right? And so, and I want to give you an example. So I'm going to share my screen again here and show you, this is an actual case that I had a couple years ago with a student. So if we look here and we look at what I call the sticker price, the cost of attendance up at the top. So the public school, this is a Washington public school and private school in Washington. So the public school all in at the time was about 27,000, private schools almost 51,000. So it's very easy as a parent to look at that and say, okay, a little bit over 100,000, over 200,000, the private school's off the list. We can't afford it. But I want you to see what happened with this student and really what the net cost to the family was at the end of the day. So this family had what's called an expected family contribution, which we'll talk about in a minute, of $21,500. And when the package, those financial aid award letters came in, this was the net cost at the bottom of these 2 schools. So the public school, it was still 27,000. The student was awarded some loans, and I'm not including loans in this because loans need to be paid back, obviously. But at the private school, what that family was expected to pay was $30,000. So that's a really different conversation to have. It's a $3,000 difference versus almost double. And so
Right.
I would really encourage you not, but until you do your homework, don't just look at a sticker price and think of that times 4 and say, that's off the list. Because this, when I used to speak in public before COVID, I'd always have people raise their hand and say, yes, that happened to my older son. So that's where a private school, like Mary Pat was talking about, the different types of schools, can maybe get close to a UW sticker price. So it's counterintuitive, but it happens. And it's not
And
rare.
I was going to say, and not to poo-poo $3,000, but it could be that your child's chance of graduating in 4 years might be a lot higher at a private school. They tend to get kids out faster, generally speaking. Or it could be that your student's top choice of major is easier to get admitted to, or the classroom size is smaller, or there can be a lot of advantages to a private school too. I mean, again, it depends on the student and the fit, but
Yeah. Well, and I would share, just, this is me putting on my mom hat. Both of my kids went to out-of-state public schools, and they both graduated in 4 years. And so I'll say to you, kids don't know how to do that, right? Because in high school, you don't have tons of prerequisites and all this stuff. It's pretty hard to not graduate from high school because you missed a class, right? So they don't have that skill set. So what I would recommend is, I had a 4-year grid with them, and I didn't really care what they took to fill the requirements, but I was kind of on them about, hey, my son was in business. Make sure, have you taken both of your arts and humanities that you need? So I paid for a couple courses at BC
sure.
because I paid $400 so that they were on track. So I would that's just a sidebar. It is financial because it saves you money, but it isn't impossible, even at a big state school, to have your kids done in 4 years, but you got to be a part of it. I'm not a big proponent of being helicoptery, but in that area, it's good to kind of keep the kids on track.
There are certain things in the college process that parents should be helicoptering.
Yeah, and that to me
they're two hands off, and then the student forgets to do something that's very critical. So, okay.
Yeah.
So how do colleges discount?
Yeah, so let me talk about that. First, I want to show you, this is a study, and then we'll get into it. I just want to show you the magnitude of the discounting, and this was a decade, 2008 to 2018. So it's getting a little dated, and these numbers, percentages are going up, right? So in that decade, tuition went up about 47%. The amount of institutional, meaning endowment money, grant aid discounts went up 91%. So much more than tuition. And that's all we hear about is tuition, the cost of education. So that really makes it more of an 18%. So this is really, really huge. So you want to understand it, and you want to be able to take advantage of it. So I'm going to stop share here because that's not what we're talking about now. But the way that they do it, there's one of two ways they do it. They either offer you need-based aid, and so you have to figure out if you're eligible for need, if you have financial need, and that's going to differ. And Mary Pat said it earlier, but I joke with parents, if I could just push a tape recorder and have an answer for all the questions I ever get asked, it depends would be what I would record, because it's really true. If the schools were the same, Mary Pat wouldn't have a business and I wouldn't have a business, right? It's very complex, and the schools are all different. So some schools are amazing at meeting needs, some schools aren't so good, and some are in the middle. And then there's also merit aid, which is the non-need-based aid. So typically pre-COVID, it was grades and test scores, also talent, leadership, all different things depending on the school. With COVID coming in and so many schools being test optional, that your child can get merit without test scores at almost every school, because the reason why they're doing merit aid is to start enticing that student to come to their school and lowering that sticker price, because it's a student that they want, right? They don't
Right.
care about your financials. And if they don't give that merit aid, they know the school down the street that they're competing with, if they do, parents are probably going to say, this is too expensive. That other school's giving us scholarships. That's where you're going to go. So that's really how they do it with need and merit-based aid.
Right. And just to clarify, so not all schools do offer merit aid because there's some schools that don't need to. So, but Peg's right. That's how colleges attract students. You know, like the University of Alabama, they have a fantastic program in their honors college for students who have really good grades and strong test scores. They get a full tuition 100%. They don't even have to write an essay for it. Like it's just you were given in the honors college at University of Alabama is outstanding. It's so strong. But there are some schools, I can remember a few years ago, a family friend, his son got into one of the very selective schools and he applied to other schools and got lots of merit aid because he was a smart kid. And he called up and said, hey, I'm wondering, would you match this? And they basically said, if you don't want your spot, just step aside because there's people who are willing to pay that full price. So just, it's not everybody gives merit aid.
Oh, no. Yeah. And that's another thing that is important. That's part of that homework / due diligence, because you have to understand that every year there's articles that some mom is ranting about my kid got into 7 of the Ivies and we got no money. And I'm like, yeah, that's your fault because you should have known that before you went down that road, you know?
Okay. So how do we know if a college offers merit aid?
Yeah. So, you know, you can go to their website, right? You know, some websites are great and very open about what they offer and detailed actually. But
I noticed the state schools tend to be better about that. Would you agree or no?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some private schools that are pretty good, but it can really vary. And I'm going to hop back on here. I'm going to share again. And I just want to pop into, I just want to show you, come on. There we go. I just want to show you, this is software that, College Aid Pro software that I use in my business, in my practice when I'm supporting families. And I just want to show you guys how schools can really, really differ. So if we're looking at a few schools here and how they function, we haven't really gotten into the need-based aid yet, but I'll talk about that. You know, Mary Pat asked me about that in a minute. But like, if we look at a Chapman, which is a really popular school with a lot of kids, right, in California, if you look here, 18% of the kids receive merit aid and the average package is $20,519, right? So that's a decent discount. It's a 25% off discount. And if you look here, if you look at all these different scholarships that Chapman has, and when it says automatic, that means exactly what you think it means. It means you have this GPA and this test score combination or this GPA, and you're getting this money. Like, look at that, 32, and this is per year. So that's a massive discount. And if you know that your child at a school like this, and this is Mary Pat's expertise, you know, this is your middle 50%. Well, if your child has a 4.0, that's not a stretch school, right? They're going to want your child, and then you're more likely to get this merit aid. So there are sources of this information online, and sometimes the websites will be really good about it. But as we both have kind of alluded to, you know, there's other schools like Yale. So Yale, you look here, percent receiving non-need merit, 0. The Ivy, Stanford, MIT, none of those schools give merit. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Just like Mary Pat said, you know, well, step aside, there's 10 more people willing to come in, right? All the kids that apply have good grades and test scores. And unfortunately with COVID, with them being test optional, it increased their applications tremendously, because a lot of kids that would never have applied, that have great GPAs, that are smart, wonderful kids, thought, hey, here's my chance. And so it just gave them the opportunity to reject that many more people. So then they look more selective, and it's just a crazy circle. Yeah. But you really got to know. And just as Mary Pat said, there's some out-of-state schools. Like my son went to Indiana University.
Mhm.
He got merit. So there are schools that have merit that are really trying to attract top-notch
Mhm.
out-of-state kids. And then there's other schools where you're never going to get a dime of merit. And so that's what you need. You need to either want to research this all yourself or find good sources of information, because you could save yourself literally, $50,000, $100,000 by understanding some of these things. I even messed up, even with my expertise with my son. He missed by about 60 points on the SAT, going from getting 5,000 more in merit. So I blew it, and 20,000 bucks more that I paid out if I had pushed him, hey, yeah, take that SAT again and study some more. So I know tests are, we're in a COVID world here, so that's not really necessarily the reality. But my point is, it's really important for parents to be knowledgeable. And I'll just share this. And I usually share this when I'm doing webinars, is I tell people, I'm going to teach you how to be proactive and not reactive to the colleges. And what I mean by that is, I'll tell you a story about a woman who called me a couple springs ago. I hadn't worked with her, and she said, my son got into his dream school and they gave him $20,000 a year, but they expect me to pay 40 and I don't have it. Can you help me? So at that point, this woman, it's March of her kid's senior year. She can't pay this bill. So she's either going to tell her kid no, or she's going to go into major debt, leverage her retirement, cause a lot of stress to make it happen. So at that point, she's very reactive. And the college is in the position of power, right? And I hate to say it, but they get what they're doing here, right? They're nonprofits, but they are big business and they have robust marketing machines, right? And so they know all the things to say that are going to be heard by parents and students. So it's on parents to get knowledgeable. And it sounds a little cheesy, but knowledge really is power, because if you understand financial aid, and then you understand where you fit when you're visiting schools, you know how to get to the bottom of it and ask questions and really understand the schools that are going to be affordable for you.
And the one thing about merit aid, and maybe not 100% of the cases, but in most cases, because we're going to talk about need-based aid next. Need-based aid you do have to apply for, but often for merit, it's not an app. You don't apply for merit aid. It's given upon admission in most cases. There may be a Fafsa required or something like that sometimes, but generally speaking, it's
Yeah.
you don't
I mean, some
apply.
schools have big ones that are like full ride or full tuition, and they'll say, yep, you got a separate application. But yeah, most of the time there might be a have your admission app in by December 1.
Yeah. I mean, there can be deadlines and things, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, it's not something separate that a student applies for.
Yeah, very little of the time is it an extra app. Yeah.
Okay, so how does a college decide if a family qualifies for need-based aid?
Yeah, so what you're doing, and let me share my screen again and go pop over to the Zoom bar is in my way. Let me pop over to my slides again. So with need-based aid, that's why you're submitting financial aid forms. That's how they're going to know. That's how they're going to calculate what you can do here. So it's a very simple formula. There's this cost of attendance, which is your sticker price. So that's tuition and fees, room and board, books. And then all schools either have a line item for personal expenses and travel, or they mush them together. And that can be a very high expense. It could be 3,000 or 4,000 a year.
Yeah. Somebody had asked in the chat about like, how do you find that? So every college on its website, there is a cost of attendance page, and you can also find it, College Board has a good website and things like that, but every college has to post this. Sometimes, again, this is just me speaking. So I think some of the numbers are a little inflated, like they might say $2,000 a year for transportation. Well, if it's a kid going over to Eastern Washington, that's a tank of gas. Okay. But again, if you're going to school in Boston or Florida, I mean, someplace where you've got those plane tickets, that's a different story. So just don't just look at the total, like maybe go, oh, in like books, they always say like $1,500 a year in books. My own kids have always said, Mom, if we pay more than $200 a semester, we've done something wrong. So again, I think sometimes they inflate a little bit, but you can disagree with me.
Yeah, just realize that that's all in there. And when I'll show you toward the end, the 4-year view, and it lays out all the components of cost of attendance. And I routinely do exactly what you're saying, Mary Pat. When it's an in-state and we're looking at UW, I'm like, okay, so that line item, that's 4,000, we're going to bump that down to like, 800, $1,000 for personal expenses.
Right.
Because it's inflated, but if the kid's coming from Maine,
Right.
it might be more accurate. So
Yeah.
so that's your sticker price. Then they subtract this expected family contribution, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. That is what all of this revolves around, right? And then if your EFC is less than the cost of attendance, that's going to be your financial need at that school. So what is an EFC? It is the minimum annual amount that the colleges think you can afford to pay for school. And I want to stress minimum because it doesn't mean that's all they're going to expect. Many schools do not meet 100% of your needs. So if the school costs 60 and you have an EFC of 40, you have need of 20,000. Well, that doesn't mean every school in the country is going to swoop in and say, here, Jones family, here's your 20,000 in work study and good loans and grants. A lot of them meet 75% of needs. So you're what's called gapped, right? So just realize it's the minimum and also realize it's the annual amount. I mean, I've had one mom, and it just happened like 3 weeks ago. I used to say no clients ever in 7+ years that have seen estimates of their EFC, and they look at me and say, yeah, that makes sense. I can pay that. People are always floored at how high these numbers are, but they have 3 different methodologies. And I want to touch on 2 of them that are the 2 financial aid forms. So the main drivers here are parental income, parents' assets. So it's non-retirement assets. Kids' assets and income can be a driver. They can be quite big if they have them, but usually they don't, right? And then if you're doing pre-tax retirement contributions, that's considered income. And that's usually a shocker to parents because, you're not taxed on it, but they throw it back in. And then if you have multiple kids in school, just for the next couple of years, that can be a nice perk, but that's potentially going to go away. And we'll chat about that at the end. So the FAFSA, it stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is the form that every school in the country requires. And most schools only require this, right? The key highlight.
October 1st for seniors, right?
What?
It came out October 1st.
Yep,
for the senior
comes out
class.
October 1st every year. I was just helping a mom today and it kept crashing. So it doesn't always work at the beginning. But anyways, no retirement accounts are included. So if you've saved really well and you've got 401ks and IRAs, that's off the table. The home you live in, so that's called your home equity, is your market value minus your mortgage or HELOC, whatever you have there. That's your equity. That's off the table. If you have a family-owned business with less than 100 full-time employees, for the next couple of years, the value of that business, if you have inventory and office space and that sort of stuff, that's off the table. And also a big.
Oh, Peg, you stopped. Can't hear you. Peg. Oh, what happened? Okay, what happened? What happened here? Let me hold off for a second. Let me see what's going on here. Oh, okay, Peg, you're muted. You're muted.
Could you?
Oh, there
it
you
seemed
go.
like all of a sudden I just
it just froze. Yeah, so can you guys hear us now? I can hear Peg now. I couldn't hear her before. Can you guys hear us?
Yes. Yeah. You know.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. David says
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
It dropped me off.
Technology. Okay.
Yeah, it just totally dropped me off of Zoom.
Yeah,
That
it did. It
was
was, I could see you, but I couldn't hear you. Okay, so
okay.
we were talking about expected family, the FAFSA we were talking about.
Yeah, okay. So let me just pop up here. I'll share my screen again. So yeah, so on the FAFSA, let me go into present mode here. On the FAFSA, if you're divorced or separated, only the custodial parent where the child spends the most time is on there. So that's a biggie for those families for planning. So just keep that in mind if that's applicable to you. So
Okay, someone just asked a question on the FAFSA.
yeah.
It's a good question. So, and I know there's a way to do this, but hopefully you can explain it easier than I could.
Sure.
The FAFSA only allows 10 colleges. If you want to send the FAFSA to more than 10, do you have to wait till those are all accepted and then you add more?
Yeah, you want to wait for it to process, right? So you do your 10, you submit it, and you might even want to call a couple schools. It's usually at least 3 to 4 business days. A student aid report called a SAR will hit up in your child's FAFSA account. And that usually means, okay, it's been processed and that's been sent out to those 10 schools. Then you log back in, delete those 10 and submit whatever are left, 5 or whatever. And you do the same thing again. And when you submit the FAFSA, you will get a page, at least last year you did, that gives you a confirmation. Print that page because it's proof that you sent it in case the school says we didn't get it before the deadline or whatever. It also lists all the schools you sent it to, and it tells you your EFC. So you'll know your EFC. So yeah, that's how you handle more than 10 schools. Okay. So the second form, which my slides are already starting to populate here, is called the CSS profile. So there's about, I'm not even sure how many, it's about 200.
I say a couple hundred.
Yeah, they're mostly private, but there's a few publics in there like UVA and
University of Michigan.
and William and Mary. Yeah, there's a few publics in there, but they're mostly private that require this form in all with the FAFSA, not in lieu of the FAFSA. You still have to do the FAFSA. So this form is administered by College Board. So if your kids are in APs, taking the SAT, PSAT, they're already in the College Board system, they've got a login. And so you're going to want to submit this. This usually goes live a little bit before October 1, and it did that this year as well. So there's some key differences on this one. Most of the time, primary home equity is considered in some capacity. Again, like I said, it depends on the school, but it's probably going to get thrown in there and considered an asset. So for some families, that's a really big deal. I was talking to a family earlier, not a huge income, some assets, but 800,000 in equity. So they were trying, and we're talking about schools that don't look at equity as closely or at all. Also for divorced separated families, the non-custodial parent, there's a separate non-custodial profile form, and most schools will look at both. So that can be a big changer compared to the FAFSA for families. And then businesses are on the table. That little perk is gone. And are all the colleges the same? No, they absolutely are not. So that would make it too easy. So these are all planning opportunities. You know, I'm a planner by background, as I shared. And so to me, this is the stuff you want to understand because it can mean tens of thousands of dollars in your pocket and you receiving endowment money.
Yeah. So we've been getting some questions on the CSS profile, and I know it depends on the college. And I'll be frank, and I'm sure you'd agree with this. The CSS profile is like the FAFSA on steroids. I mean, they ask, it is the FAFSA takes about what, 20 minutes probably to fill out. It's not that hard, you know. But the CSS profile is a different animal. But and because people are saying, well, do you wait until your child's admitted, until you fill it out? But I know there are some schools, I didn't check Santa Clara for this year, but Santa Clara on their website say we don't use the CSS profile is not used for merit aid. So if families aren't looking for need-based aid, should they still complete it? Because it is
that it's, and we have this all the time. I have parents, I don't want to do the FAFSA, my neighbors didn't do it, blah 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 blah. I'll answer the FAFSA and then also hit on the CSS. I'm a big advocate for all families submitting the FAFSA.
I agree.
Yeah, for a bunch of reasons. There are some schools that require it to dole out merit aid, which makes no sense because they're not looking at your finances. But you'd have to go through and make sure that they don't do that if you're not going to submit it. One, two, if you want to even consider getting a direct student loan, your child will automatically be considered for that with a
Why
FAFSA.
is that a better loan, Peg?
Why is that a better loan?
Like, like, if somebody needed loans, why would they want a direct student loan?
Well, one, it's almost always the lowest interest rate, right? And
Okay.
it's federal. So, like, God forbid something happens to your child, they become disabled or pass away, the loan is forgiven. It's also a loan in your kid's name. It's the only place that's going to do that because the government's encouraging education because your kids are not a good risk to loan to. So, what's great about that is that your child starts building a credit history, which is huge because when they get out and want to get an apartment with a bunch of their buddies, if they have no credit history, they're coming to you to co-sign leases. And it starts their adult life in that way. And honestly, I have a lot of families that if the market's doing well, it's like, why don't I take a student loan? Even if it's not subsidized, and I have a slide later to talk about a subsidized student loan, but if you can do better and keep your portfolio in the market, you might as well take a lower interest loan. So those loans, there's other loans that are not, don't fall in that category, but a direct federal student loan is the best loan out there. And the most a student is going to get awarded, unless they're independent, meaning most kids aren't independent, is $27,000 over all 4 years. And in my mind, that's a reasonable amount of debt for a kid to get a good 4-year education. And most kids, my daughter's a social worker, if she had full loans, she would have been able to pay that off, right? It's not an outrageous amount of debt. And then grandma or mom and dad can help pay it if they want to, but it's by far the best loan out there. But if you don't submit the FAFSA, you're not even on the radar, right? And the thing about the CSS profile that you got to be careful about not submitting is there's 2 questions that I always tell my families you've got to ask the school before you decide not to submit it. Like, if you know for sure you have an EFC of $100,000, well, you're not going to get need-based aid, right? So you need to call the school and say, one, if things change in our life, and
Which
COVID
can
just
happen.
happened and people's lives
It does
change
happen.
very, very quickly, right? Can we submit that form and can we work with you? And you want to make sure
After the student has started at the college.
right. And you want to make sure that the school says, yeah, absolutely, we'll work with you. Santa Clara, which I dealt with a couple years ago, was like, if you didn't apply for freshman year, we will never consider you. So you've got to be really careful before you draw that line in the sand and say, I'm definitely not doing it, right? You've got to get that answer, because I wouldn't roll the dice that my life wasn't going to change over 4 years.
What's the second
Before
question?
COVID, I wouldn't have rolled that dice.
What's the second question? You have to ask them.
You got to make sure that they don't need it for merit aid. And there are a few in there, doesn't make sense. But again, you don't want to find that out after the fact and be stung. But if you get good answers to those questions, then you might make the decision, you know what, maybe we won't do the CSS. And I was on a webinar a couple months ago, and the head of financial aid at Tufts was on, and she was so frank and said to the audience, she said, look, parents, if you're going to apply, if you need financial aid, don't not apply for financial aid. Get your award letter and say, oh, we're going to apply for financial aid now. She said, that doesn't work for us, and you're not going to get money. So again, I'll just go back to my point of getting the knowledge and knowing where you fit at the different schools that your child is considering. And if your child hasn't even gotten to that point of actually having a list, that's even better, because learn it as you're building the college list, looking at the academic, personal, and financial fit, because then you'll find affordable schools that are a great fit for your kids.
And someone was asking, and the answer is yes, you complete these every year that your child is in college.
FAFSA every year, and then some schools will require the CSS every year, and some might do an abbreviated form because they have to pay College Board. So I think some of them, they don't go through it every year, but I was just helping a mom today with Syracuse, and she has to do it. This is the 3rd year I've helped her. So every year she's got to resubmit the CSS.
Okay.
CSS has a small fee. Like the first school is $25, And then subsequent schools are 16. So it's not exorbitant, but it's not free. Whereas the FAFSA is free.
So I sometimes have students or parents reach out to me and they'll say, oh, I've got a very, academically smart student that, 4.0, lots of rigor, maybe they've been able to take test scores. I'm looking for a full ride. And in my experience, there aren't that many schools that actually offer full rides. What do you, what's
Yeah,
your
that's
take on
my
that?
experience too. Like, I have a handout that I got from some colleague, and I'll send it to some families where the student has a really good GPA. But I always tell them that, I've had a few students in 7 years that
Yeah, I
have
have
gotten
too.
full rides that aren't athletes. Now, athletes is
Yeah,
a little different, right? That's a whole
right.
different segment, right? But it's not, I know kids are really smart and they're what I call super kids,
Yeah,
right? But yeah, it's when I do planning with people, you always want to be conservative. You don't want to pick, hey, if all the stars align and this is
yeah.
my best day of my life, this is what I'm going to put in my planning. Yeah, you want to plan conservatively, and expecting a full ride is not a smart strategy.
Um, so another question, oh, and I was gonna say, I know I like data a lot, and at least in the United States, it's something like 1.5% of students applying to college get a full ride. So it's pretty low.
Yeah,
Um,
it's rare.
so and you kind of talked about this, but how can you look at the 4-year cost and how is that calculated and all that?
Yeah. Let me show you, because with a visual, it's much easier for you to visualize it.
Yeah.
So let's pick a couple. I call it how to pay because that just sounds nicer than a 4-year cash flow, but that's really what it is. So if we look again, we're here with Chapman, and I'm going to show you the difference. Like, this is a sample client, obviously. And so you see up here, here's this family's EFC. So that's the first thing. You got to understand what your EFCs are and if there's any way to reduce them. If you have really nice income, you're not going to quit your job. So that might be dictating a lot of it. But here's the EFCs. Here's your the federal EFC. So that's from the FAFSA. Then there's an institutional EFC. So when you submit, and I didn't explain this, but I'll let you guys know, when you submit that CSS profile, it's very different than the FAFSA. Like I said, with the FAFSA, you get a confirmation page and they tell you. The CSS, you send that off to Occidental, say. Occidental gets it, and they do their own proprietary number crunching, and they come up with their own EFC for your child, right? And they might use a slightly different way of calculating it for your child and include home equity in a certain way or whatever they do than another student. So this is an estimate, but it's with the CSS schools, it's a lot harder to nail them down on it. So that's why if your child is into those kind of schools, it's good to kind of cast a wider net, because then if you have competing schools and your child gets into a bunch of them, then you can get into appealing and kind of playing them off each other. So just so you understand, that's a much more opaque process and subjective. So back to your question here. So if you're looking at this in a 4-year view, we've got the net cost. And I think somebody put something in the chat that I saw come in, and we talked about this before. Here's the breakdown. You got tuition, you've got room and board, you've got books and supplies, see your travel and miscellaneous, which Mary Pat and I were talking about. So for Chapman, if you live in Maine, you're probably going to spend a decent amount of money in travel, right? But if it was a UW student going to Central, you would lower this dramatically, right? So then you want to look at what's the sticker price. So the sticker price all in with no discounts is 335,092,
For
335,000,
4
right?
years. Yeah. Okay.
For 4 years, because again, we're looking over 4 years, and this is inflated about 3% every year, right? Because the costs go up.
Yep.
Then you're either going to get that discount of need-based or merit. Hopefully you're going to get one of those, right? If it's a school that you don't, then the sticker price is what it is. But hopefully you're realizing a discount. So for this family's example, there's a combination of need and merit aid, right? So when they get their discounts, it goes from 335,000 down to 200 and, little shy of 262,000. So that's your first piece. That's your net cost from the college. The next piece you want to bring in is what I call your college pre-approval. So this is what you can afford. And this is a really important thing to think about ideally before you go shopping
Yes.
for colleges, because you don't want to go shop for Maseratis when you can't afford a
Yeah.
Maserati, right?
When you need
People
a
are
Pinto.
constantly doing that. Like I have a Hyundai, I would never go to the Maserati dealership, right? It's just, I can't afford it. It's not my thing. So if you look at the pre-approval amount, that's going to be 529s, cash flow. Is grandma going to help? All these different things. Do you expect your kids to have skin in the game? These are all the things you want to look at. So you get your net cost from the college. You take away, in this example, 100, almost 123,000. This family can afford to contribute over those 4 years. Then you've got a funding gap of you still have a decent funding gap here, right? Of 139,000. And then you look at, okay, how are we going to meet this funding gap? And you can do it with loans. You can do it with home equity. There's different things that people look at, but you want to understand funding gaps. And so when I show this to parents and we look at several schools, there can be dramatic differences in the funding gaps. Like if we look at Yale, because I've got Yale in here, just to show you how things can be so different. This family has some need-based aid, right? Yale happens to be this kind of school that is a subset of, it's called a consensus methodology school. But if you look here, Yale's cost all in is $344,000. But because this family is going to receive some pretty hefty need-based aid discounts, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Then it takes it down to, from that over 300,000 to 168. And then the family, like I said before, has 122,000 to put toward it. You got a funding gap of $46,000.
Yeah.
So this is how you want to be thinking. You want to be looking at all these different schools in between. I'm picking Yale as an extreme example, just to show you that this can really vary. And you shouldn't just look at sticker price, like I said at the beginning, and say, oh, I got to multiply it by 4. But you want to see where these discounts can come in. And then you do have an ability, and I work with families every spring on this about, yeah, reach out to them and ask for this. And this is how you should ask them. And the worst they can say is no. And then you can get even bigger discounts potentially, depending on their situation and what their yields are and all that sort of stuff.
So somebody had asked the question, there's a lot of, everybody, so Fafsa and CSS profile are out for the class of 22. And what's the push why everybody says fill it out as soon as possible?
Yeah. So my take on that is if you're eligible for state aid, like if you're low income, absolutely, you need to get it in right away because there's a queue and you want to be in the line and funds can dry up, right? So that's legit. But if not, what I tell families to do is Google all the schools on your kids list. Just Google Chapman priority financial aid deadline, and you'll get a link, and you pull it up, and it's going to say if you're applying early decision, it's this.
Yep.
If you're applying early action, regular decision, and what you want to do is whichever school has the earliest deadline on your child's list, just shoot to get it in at least 5 business days before. You can do it earlier than that, but there used to be this big thing. Oh, you got to do it. Used to go live on January 1 years ago, and parents were actually doing it on New Year's Day. I was like, you don't need to do that. Plus, it crashes because there's so much traffic. So that's what I recommend people do. Like my daughter's school, they didn't care if you sent it October 1 or the night before the priority deadline. They batched it, and it all came in. But that's why it's important to print out your confirmation. You have proof that you met the deadline. But that's my advice about that. And if you have a free weekend later in October and your deadlines aren't for a while, go ahead and do it. But you don't have to feel stressed that you have to do it on October 2nd.
And the FAFSA, like I said, the government has great websites on how to fill it out, lots of videos and all that kind of stuff. Somebody else asked, does applying for financial aid impact admissions?
So it depends. It depends.
I know.
It really depends on
the college.
Yeah, it depends on
the colleges are businesses. Everybody needs to remember that.
They're very, very big businesses, especially now. So if the school says they're need blind, which I kind of am a little jaded and say I don't really think that exists, but that means that like they literally do not take that into their decision-making process, right? And it doesn't matter if you're Bill Gates or you're unemployed. They're still going to look at the child, the student, the same way. If they're what's called need aware, that means that it comes into play, but it doesn't mean each child that applies, they go, oh, we have to give them some money, they're out. That's not what they do. It really, when I've talked to the administrators, they're like, when we get to where we're finishing up our class and we're down to the last 10, 15%, and we've got two kids that are pretty similar, they might look at that. And if one kid's, let's face it, if you're full pay, and they're not going to let a full pay in that's not going to make it, because then you don't return the next year and that hurts their stats and their rankings. But if you're going to do well at their school and you're a kid that they would accept, that could help you. But it's not every student, right? It's really not every student. So, I mean, that's pretty much how it works. If you need money, there's plenty of schools that are going to offer you money. And if they want your child, they know that's part of the deal, because they look at their net revenue. So if they charge 70, but they're willing to give you 20, they're still bringing in $50,000 in the door. And that works for them, right? That's how they function.
So it's almost 8. So I'm gonna wrap it up with a couple questions here, and then just so then we can open it up to questions. But so can you just talk for a minute about, and you kind of talked a little bit with the subsidized loans, but can you talk about student loans and how they work?
Yeah. And let me pull up a slide. And by the way, I gave these slides to Mary Pat. So when you get that follow-up email, you'll see these. So I'm going to pull up a slide for this just because it's easier. It's just much easier for people to follow. Okay. So let me get to, sorry, I got to go through all this. Okay. So these are the loans I was talking about before, the direct federal loans. And so the numbers I mentioned, 27,000, the numbers you see here, these are the maximums that you can get each year. And the number on the left is the maximum subsidized. So if you have need of $3,500, $4,500 or $5,500, they'll give you the subsidized version, which means no interest is accruing until 6 months after you graduate. So it's crazy not to take that, right? It's free money on the government for 4.5 years or 3.5, wherever your child is, right? They'll always give you an extra 2,000 of the unsubsidized. So same loan, just the interest starts accruing. The interest rate this year for freshmen that just started 3.734. It went up about 1% from last year. It's based on the 10-year treasury note, but it's still going to be the cheapest debt out there. And it's use it or lose it. So that way, that 4-year cash flow I showed you, I have people that will call me and say, we used up all our 529s, and oh, can we go back and get those loans that we were offered freshman and sophomore year? And I tell them no. So you want to plan it out. And if you don't accept those loans, make sure you know you don't need them in your 4-year spending. So that's the best loan out there. The federal government also offers what's called Parent Plus loans. And I think they call them plus loans now, but I'm going to still keep saying Parent Plus, because I want all you parents here to understand it's a loan of yours. One of you applies, has nothing to do with your child. So you can have a verbal agreement that they're paying it, but nobody's going to go after them, right? And the colleges can offer you a parent loan in the amount of their cost of attendance minus whatever aid they give you. The difference they can put right on that financial aid award letter and say, here's your $50,000 parent loan, and see, now you owe $0, right? And this is where a lot of parents get in hot water, because they start taking these out and all of a sudden they're in $175,000 of debt. If you look at the interest rate, 6.284, much higher. And in my mind, a massive loan origination fee, 4.25. So they're really kind of sticking it to you. And then the last group is just private student loans. So that's Sallie Mae, Discover Card. You just have to look at those. They don't necessarily have the same perks as the federal, and you're going to be co-signing almost definitely. So those are, and there's state loans too, but not all states have them, and not everybody's eligible for them. But those are the 3 main categories of loans.
Okay. So you also mentioned this, and people might have seen this in the media recently, but Fafsa, there's the Fafsa Simplification Act. You want to just address the
so this was passed in December 2020, and it was supposed to go into effect with the October 1st, 2023 FAFSA, or to October 2022
Yeah.
FAFSA. And several months ago, the Department of Ed realized, oh no, we need way more time to implement this. So just realize, depending on the age of your kids, it won't go into effect until the October 1, 2023 FAFSA, which is actually for the 2024-2025 school year. So we've got a few years, but a few things did go into play, very minor things. In the past, any male had to, if they were 18, had to register for the selective service to submit the FAFSA. So they've gotten rid of that requirement. There's still a question on there, and I was just in there today and it said, do you want to waive it? Do you want to waive having to do that? And you can say yes. So if you have a son. And then the other one is if there was a drug conviction, you can still get a loan. So the biggies about, there's going to be changes for divorced and separated families and your businesses. And if you have multiple kids in school, they're going to get rid of that perk. So we'll see. I mean, there's a petition. The company that I'm with now, one of the guys put out a petition. If you don't like that rule, that they're not giving you a break when you have two in school, go to change.org and in the search, put FAFSA and Matt Carpenter. There's a short little video, and it's a petition to not put in that, because normally your EFC goes down 50% when you have two kids in school. And that act is getting rid of that rule, which makes no sense for families at all.
Okay. So this is the part where you and I both give one piece of advice. So I'll start with my piece of advice, and it is to simply, understand what your budget is. I know every parents don't like to talk money with their kids. They don't want them to know anything. And we, as parents, a lot of us want to, we want to give our kids everything. But think about the numbers Peg's been talking about, and I see it in my practice all the time, $75,000 a year, $60,000 a year, and there could be more than one kid and all this stuff. It's a lot of money, and there's just a lot of different schools, a lot of different paths and all this stuff like that. And it bothers me so much because it always happens in spring of senior year. And I've talked and said, please consider the merit aid, look if it's available. And then the parents are like, so my kid got into this UC, where's the merit aid? Or my kid got into UW, where's the merit aid? Like, there ain't any merit aid. So anyways, just know that I think kids do better understanding, like there's budgets are real. We all have budgets for everything, so that's my advice is don't be afraid to talk about budgets, be realistic about your budgets, do the research like Peg's talking about. What's your piece of advice, Peg?
Yeah, so my advice, you're stealing half my advice there.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's really, the stuff that I've shown you, and I've shown you it because you really got to do it. If you drift through this, you are costing yourself tens of thousands of dollars more. You're going to have more friction and eye rolling. I mean, with teenagers, you've got eye rolling. There's no way around it, right? But I mean, I did this with my kids, and my son had two schools, and the school in Pennsylvania flew him out there, and he had fun for a weekend. And of course he wanted to go there. And I did my 4-year cash flow. And I said, nope, it's $70,000 more. And you like this other school as well. And he looked at me and said, that's great. Yeah. And he went to Indiana and had a majorly great experience. There was no friction in our family because my husband and I set the expectation, we did our homework, and we knew. And it's just really, really important. And then you guys will sleep at night, which is the big thing, right?
Well, I remember when my son was going through this process, back in 2015 or whatever it was, and there was a school he really wanted to go to, and just like you said, we researched the scholarship money, and he needed a certain GPA in order to get the highest one. And we said, if you can qualify for that. And he thought he did, but he found out that a geometry class that he took in the summer before 9th grade was on his transcript, and he hadn't put any effort into it. So he had to retake that. He did. He retook it because he knew if he wanted to go to that school, he needed to get the A, because that would bump up his GPA. Yeah. And, I mean, it's being realistic.
Yep.
Okay, so last question before we go into questions. I've been trying to answer them as I see them come up. But so Peg, why don't you explain to families how you do support them in this process?
Yeah. So now that I've joined College Aid Pro, we have something called a MyCap consultation. And we just created this, and I'll show you a slide on it, but then it's also going to be in the deck, so you'll have this. But what it basically is that software that you saw me go into that has all the data about any school. You can put multiple schools. It's got an advanced search, so you can search for merit. It's just a really robust tool that's getting better every day. For $299, you get a year of access to that, because you're going to continue to use this when your child gets award letters. Plug them in, look at that, how to pay for your cash flow and those funding gaps. So it covers that, and it covers an hour meeting with me. So you end up getting your own portal. You go in there, populate it, and then we get together and we talk strategy, and we look at your unique family situation and your child's schools. And I'll even give ideas. You know, if your child's a senior, you might not be that open to opening that up again, but I'm talking to seniors all the time right now. But if you have a junior, it's great. You've got that. And it really gives you everything you need. And normally it's $299 to book an hour, and we're throwing in the software. So the link down there, which I can pop in the chat once we're in Q&A, you click on that, that takes you right into it. You pay, you book the hour with me, get into the software. And you know, I'm just really passionate about this, and this software helps you get your head around it. And then you've got the guidance. We're creating an academy where there's going to be lives and Q&As and all this stuff. And that just comes with being in the software. There's no extra fee for that. So it gives you a community, and it just helps you, you know, have the information and the support you need to work through this journey, you know, with your child and find affordable schools.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Uh-oh, what did I do? There we go. I always get scared when things don't show up properly. Okay, let's see. If I screen this. Okay, so we're going to go into in Peg's handouts. I've got my handouts aren't as great as Peg's, but I do have a couple handouts that'll be sent out for everybody. Just to know that the next Find Your Fit session is going to be on Tuesday, October 19th, and it's an overview of the college process. It's kind of like a college light. This is more probably for families, 9th, 10th graders, middle school parents who just want to kind of get an understanding. It's suitable for students too, but it's going to be on October 19th from 7 to 8 p.m. And you register at the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. And always, I do want families to know that I am a resource in the community. I'm very passionate about my work with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. Anytime you've got questions, I don't sit there and try to hook you as a client or anything like that. I don't need to do that. The email just to reach out if you ever have questions is just findyourfit@lwsf.org. So let's see if there's any questions. We've done a good job of answering them as we go along, but let's see if okay, so here's one, Peg. And this one, I don't know if you can answer it quickly, but are there any good tips and strategies to lower your EFC?
The one thing I will tell you, and I didn't touch on this tonight, but it's a 2-year look back for your income. So like if you have a junior, when you're submitting financial aid forms, it's going to be all about the tax year of 2021 is the first year you're going to be talking about. So income is a big driver. So don't do things to raise your income that you don't need to, like create capital gains, take distributions out of a 401k because you want to buy a boat or whatever it is. You don't inflate your income. Obviously, if you get a promotion, you're not going to turn it down for financial aid. That's one thing. With assets, there are some strategies if you're going to pay money down or if you have debt and you're sitting on money. It really depends on the family. But one of the biggest things, especially in this part of the world, people make nice livings, and that's a good thing. It's just when you're trying to deal with financial aid, it makes it a little bit more challenging if you have a high adjusted gross income. But there are some strategies, but most people, there isn't that much to do to lower an EFC. But understanding your EFCs, and even with your income, you might have schools that have, I showed you in the software, there were 3 different EFCs. So one, if you're sitting on a lot of home equity, but not a lot of other assets, that certain schools could have a lower EFC because of that. So understanding the schools could lower your EFC without you implementing any strategies.
Someone asked, and I'm sure this is the case, that they went into the FAFSA and began the app and it just was spinning and spinning and
Yeah, I
spinning.
saw that. That's exactly what was happening with my client today. We got through a bunch of it and then it just started spinning and we went out and went back in and we went and did the CSS profile, came back, and it just, there must just be a lot of traffic. It's frustrating with the FAFSA. This does happen. Usually the further you get away from October 1, the better it gets.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just close out it and hopefully your stuff will have saved. Always save as you go, because we noticed her stuff wasn't saving, even though we were doing the stuff, we were hitting continue and you think it auto saves. But you really want to go back up to the top where it says save and just keep clicking that in case it, it does that and starts that dreaded circle that happens.
So someone was just asking, generally speaking, about the timeline for the college admission process. I have a handout. It's just a calendar that starts in 9th grade, kind of like recommended steps. I'll make sure that that's a handout that is sent out with the stuff that the foundation sends out. Someone else also asked, is there a list of the 300 colleges that need the CSS profile? That's on College Board, isn't it, Peg?
Yeah, if you Google CSS profile participating colleges, you'll see, oh, thank you, Carrie. You'll see the list, but always go to the college's website if there's any doubt. If there's any doubt about deadlines, what financial aid forms they require, always go to the website as the final. Because I've seen a few times on the College Board list where I'm like, that school doesn't require the CSS. So I don't know how often they update it, but that's a great place to start to see the schools.
And someone asked, and I guess we weren't clear, I apologize. Do you wait to fill out the CSS profile until your student is admitted? No.
No.
You should fill it out prior to, again, it depends on the deadline that the school publishes, but you want to have it in, and the whole thing about like, we all like to think our life continues on easily or whatever for the next 4 years. But in my own personal family situation, I've seen in a heartbeat, things change and families' financial situations change. And so just, for that reason alone, it's a good reason to make sure you fill out those forms.
Yeah, and somebody else put in here, if you were to rent your primary home and move to an apartment, would that be a bad thing from a financial aid perspective? They ask you on the FAFSA, they don't ask about your primary home, but they ask, do you have other real estate? So if you have a rental home and it's not in a business, that's something you have to disclose. So for a FAFSA only school, it's better to stay in your house, right? Because they're not going to ask about that as an asset. So no, like that's not going to help you. That would actually hurt you at a school that only requires the FAFSA. So I wouldn't do that. And then somebody said, should we declare home equity in the FAFSA app? No, you don't have to. In this whole process, you want to be honest, but less is more. Just give them what they asked for and not a smidgen more, and don't overestimate. Like on the CSS, when they ask you about your home and what it's worth, you're going to give them the lowest number that your home. It's like a quick sale, not, I stage it and I wait for the best offer. Now in Seattle, as we know, homes are going ridiculously fast for tons of money. So you always want to be honest, but you don't want to overestimate when you're doing this.
And then somebody else asked, is there a limit to how many colleges you can send the CSS profile to?
Nope. They're just going to charge you. They'll charge you for each one, but there's not, to my knowledge, there's no limit.
You just and the difference, remember, the FAFSA is free. They don't charge.
It's the only thing in this process. That's another perk of the FAFSA. And the other
Find Your Fit is free too. So
well, and if you're worried about, what if I forget a CSS school? If you enter the school into the search when you're in there, if it doesn't come up, that means they don't require it, right? If you're searching and you put in Cornell College, if they don't come up, that means they're Chapman, for example. They're not, I keep waiting for them to flip, but they haven't. They're a FAFSA school. So they're not going to come up in the search engine. So if you search all your kids' schools, then you'll be fine. And then somebody said, as a follow-up, I know, Brian, but it is ironic that you're paying it. Believe me, there's a lot of angst with College Board, with college planning people in the industry. College Board is not loved by all
No.
because some of the things they do, they're not very pro-family. So somebody said, I'm referring to my primary home only. I don't have additional. Should we declare home equity? No, you will not put your home equity for your primary home. Yeah, you don't put that on the FAFSA. You will be asked about it if you do the CSS profile, but not the FAFSA.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we have, Peg. Thanks so much. You are such a wealth of knowledge. I always enjoy learning from you.
Oh, sure. This is fun. It's fun to have a conversation, and our expertise is really great together because you're good on the academic, personal, and I do the financial, and I wouldn't be able to do what you do. So I
couldn't do what you do either. So we are a good fit. I guess
we are.
A perfect whatever. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. The recording will be sent out, the handouts, and thanks for showing up tonight. Hope the Seahawks won. I have no idea if they did.
I know. I was thinking about probably not the best night to do the webinar.
Yeah, well, I didn't check that.
Seahawks are playing Thursday night football. So thank you for everybody.
What are the odds? So all right. Well, have a good night, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.